Right, a very good evening to you guys. Welcome again to the Ratio Christi Malaysia Apologetics Talk. Now, for those who are the first time joining us, Ratio Christi Malaysia organized almost every Tuesday for the past 1 month that we invited a few apologists to come to speak to us. Today we have a very special speaker. He has spoken last week, and graciously he will continue to speak on his topic on apologetics, on the techniques of how to answer uh, issues, Dr. Thomas McCarthy. Now, afterwards, I will let my co-host, Brother Stephen Ng, to introduce Dr. McCarthy. But at the moment, I want to give an announcement. Now, for those who are planning to leave the meeting early today, please take out your pen and paper and write down an announcement that we are going to give right now. Write down on your piece of paper and book the date on the 7th of July. Our next meeting will be on the 7th of July, and we are going to have a very special speaker, Dr. David Geisler. And Dr. David Geisler uh, is the son of the legendary Norman Geisler. And if you have not heard of Norman Geisler, then you are not a real apologist. A good apologist will know who is Norman Geisler. He wrote many, many books. I have many of his books. For example, I don't have faith to be an atheist, the apologetics of Jesus, why I am a Christian, and many more. And Dr. Norman Geisler's magnus opus, which is always on my desk, is the Baker Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics. This is always next to my Bible on my desk. Now, every time when people ask me, what apologetics book should I buy, and I always say, if you have only if it's a budget problem, if you have a money problem, and you have only enough to buy one book, then this will be the book to buy. Baker's Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics. This is fantastic, fantastic. Get this book. Now, next 2 weeks on the 7th of July, I will not be the host. So fortunate for you, I will not be the host. Somebody will be the host. The Norman Geisler International Ministry will be the host, and Dr. David Geisler will speak to us, and he will teach us on conversational evangelism. Okay, how you use apologetics and evangelize through the easy way of conversation. Now, it's a free course, so don't miss it. Next 2 weeks on the 7th of July. So without further ado, I pass this time to my co-host, Brother Stephen Ng.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Appreciate the the brief introduction about Dr. David Geisler. I've actually attended the course on conversational evangelism taught by him sometime last year at the seminary, and I think it was actually a very good course. It was a very good course, and I truly recommend all of you to join next session on July 7th. So this session actually is going to be an introduction on what he is planning to teach on Zoom. Now that you can actually go on Zoom, you can actually join the course. So in Malaysia, we are hoping to work with a couple of churches. If your churches are interested, you can let us know. We will try to see how we can work together and join the course, which will be taught by people like Dr. Geisler and Thomas McCarthy. Hi, Thomas. How's the day?
Hey, Stephen.
Yes, hi. You had a good sleep last night?
I did. It is early morning here in the States, but again, coffee flows freely here, so
yes,
so I'm doing good.
So where's your coffee? Can I have some as well?
Yes.
Yes, I think I do not really need to introduce you. You were here last week. Maybe you can just briefly mention what you do at the MGI. Okay, and over to you.
Sure. So yeah, Well, my biography hasn't changed much from last week, but to catch everybody up, I do direct the Norm Geisler Institute. And what that means is we're trying to connect with churches, we're trying to help lay people share the faith, defend the faith, and multiply the faith. So it's apologetics, evangelism, and discipleship is why the Institute exists. So we try to connect with churches, try to connect with lay leaders, try to connect with pastors. I've served in ministry over 20 years in various capacities in churches. And so our vision is how we can strengthen the church and build the kingdom. We also work with schools. Now we're working with a school in Nepal. We're working with a school in Mexico, trying to bring apologetic training where they didn't have any before. I'll actually give you the Institute website today. It's relaunching this week. So if you go there right now, it's kind of the old version. But we've greatly updated, modernized it, and we're relaunching it this week. So I encourage you later this week, go check it out, and you'll see also we call them workshops because instead of saying classes, we're trying to disciple. So when we do workshops, it's about changing the person more than just information transfer. That's our heart, is that we want to equip the body, which means we have to be a certain kind of person. And we use that language from Dr. Edmund Chen. His book, A Certain Kind, has greatly influenced the Institute in the area of discipleship. Dr. Norman Geisler has written over 100 books in apologetics. All those books that were mentioned earlier. One of my favorites is The Apologetics of Jesus. Many believers find that quite surprising. I love that little book. And Dr. David Geisler is more of the evangelist. And so that's why if you heard the talk last week, that's kind of the overview. This week is going to get specific into a particular part of conversational evangelism. And then when you come back for Dr. David Geisler, he's actually finishing up a sequel to the conversational evangelism book. You're calling it Practical Apologetics, which is extending what kind of what I talked about last week and this week. So highly encourage you to check out what he's got. It won't be so much repeat, it'll be the fuller picture. We have such precious little time in the morning. So some of you felt maybe last week like you were drinking from the fire hose, as we say, that all the information was just kind of gushing towards you. And again, we pack a lot into a little bit of time. And the Institute, it's not going anywhere. So anyone who wants to follow up, and if you ask the question, how do I do that in my context? I want to have those kinds of conversations with you. So again, I'll put my email, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat bar. And anybody who wants the PowerPoints from today, I'll be glad to share those. And anybody who wants to just connect and say, how can you help me in my ministry, my church? How can you help me in my walk? That's why we exist. That's what we do. So, and I was asked to, I forgot to mention this last week. I have multiple monitors. So when I look over here and I look over here, I'm not being distracted. This is so I can clearly see things in front of me. I've got multiple things going on. So I'm going to go ahead and share. We'll get started with the presentation today because I want to leave time for questions and answers that you might have. So everybody see the presentation okay? Everybody good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So last week we talked about the components of listen, that we want to learn people's story. We want to invest time in them. We want to search for gaps in their beliefs. Then we throw light onto the situation. Then we expose the gaps so people can see that for themselves and navigate using the 3 Ds: minimize defensiveness, allow them to surface the doubt for themselves, and create a desire for them to hear more and have another conversation. So the focus today is to really hone in on the listening skills. And that's why it's called sour notes and sweet replies and the sweet conversations, simply because when we play the role of the musician, that I'm going to show you a little bit, we're listening for the sour notes people sing, per se, when they have different worldviews, when they have different religions, when things are going on. We need to hear exactly where people are so that way we can address them exactly with their issues and what is keeping them from Christ. So this is all based upon the book Conversational Evangelism. This is what it looks like. So this is where you'd find it. Again, our website, ngim.org/institute, relaunched this week. So again, if you go there right now, just ignore it. We'll have the better one up this week. I'm very excited about that. So we kind of ran through last week in a big way these four roles. That the musician is the one where we listen, and we spend a lot of time listening, and it's the artist that paints a picture. After you hear these things, we want to illuminate the conversation, throw that light, like, are you really saying, is this what you're saying? And the role of the archaeologist is you're uncovering those doubts, those true barriers. And we didn't really talk much about the builder. I know David tends to focus on the builder and the ways that we build conversations. So that might kind of intrigue you to come back on the 7th. But our focus today, we're honing in on this role of the musician, because the musician, we listen for four particular sour notes: the belief versus heart longing, the idea that some people say they believe one thing, but we hear in their conversations, we hear from them that they long for something else. They desire something else. So when somebody is in a particular religion or holds to a particular philosophy, sometimes you almost get the sense they feel trapped. They wish it was not the case. The belief versus behavior, that's where they say one thing, but they act another. And all of a sudden you realize there's an inconsistency, and you can, they talk about the things that they do maybe, and you can even see it. So we need to be able to help people surface these for themselves. And belief versus belief are contradictions in belief, and illogical beliefs are just statements that don't make sense in themselves. So our goal this time for this morning, well, my morning, your evening, is we're going to be walking through these four sour notes and looking at them specifically. So what I'm going to give you is kind of a sampling, some examples that as we encounter people and we encounter these sour notes, how do we address those? Like belief versus heart longing. If you hear somebody say something that they believe one thing, but yet they desire another, one of the things we have to come at them with is compassion. I think we forget that sometimes in our apologetics, and we come at them and we might just say, at least, and again, maybe it might be American culture, but as Americans, we're like, get over it. What's your problem? You can be very abrupt, and why can't you just get your act together? That is one way we can approach people. But if we want to be more effective in our evangelism, which is the goal, the whole mindset behind conversational evangelism, how can we be more effective? How can we say, in many ways, kind of the right things in the right way at the right time with the right disposition? All of those things being in place will help our evangelistic encounters. It doesn't guarantee success, because we as people have very stubborn hearts. But I would hate for somebody to reject the gospel of Jesus Christ because of my attitude. So we need to be the kinds of people that can address these. And so the first, we hear belief versus the heart longing. So let's understand what this looks like. So a person's worldview, their religion, or their philosophy contains beliefs that are inconsistent with the human heart. So when you're listening, you find this, that they might say one thing, but they really don't want it to be that way. So again, what oxygen is to the brain, Jesus is to the heart. So these are the kinds of things where when we're listening, and we need to, this is why we know apologetics, and this is why the Baker Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics is great for this, because when you learn kind of the bad ideas that are out there, you're almost more aware of them. I think I might have used this illustration last week, but if not, it's worth repeating. That even in my own life, I don't always know when things don't match up, when I have these inconsistencies. Because when I was in the Philippines, I went off to the Philippines. I was doing ministry there, and I had put on my clothes for the day. We went out to I think the Mall of Asia, one of the largest malls in the world, and we were there, and I was of course taking pictures at the Philippines. So you're getting, taking the selfie, and my wife sees these on social media and she says, "What are you wearing?" And I looked, I was like, I'm wearing my normal outfit. I got my shorts and I got, nice polo shirt. I think, the colors match. She said, "Well, you have plaid shorts and you have a striped shirt." It's like, but the colors match. I'm really bad at matching clothes if you can't tell. I had no idea that you're not supposed to wear these things. I had an extreme contradiction in clothing. I didn't even know it. I honestly, I don't know these things. I don't know that's, I asked my wife, "Why did you pack these things then? I can't handle these things myself." Um, so I think that's why the more we learn and the more we understand in the realm of apologetics, theology, the scriptures, and the worldviews and the religions and the things around us, the better we are at even identifying these kinds of sour notes. So one of the particular notes comes from nihilism. There's a belief that life is meaningless, purposeless, and absurd. So the heart longing, though, of humans is that there's something in the human spirit that longs for purpose and significance. So in America, nihilism is growing, and it's not uncommon in my churches for people to come and visit and will identify. They'll tell me, "I'm a nihilist." We have one at our church recently. In my years in ministering to teenagers, it was not hard to find teenagers who would tell you they were nihilists, that they believe there's no meaning, there's no purpose, we're just all, just doing whatever. And Nietzsche, of course, was the one who popularized the idea that God is dead. And it was Sartre that said all of life is an empty bubble on the sea of nothingness. Man is a useless passion. Life is one of endless futility. And so people can say they believe this, and when we hear it, we got to remember that they tend to long for something of significance. So we need to build bridges. When we hear these things, when we hear these sour notes, we need to engage them in a way that will build bridges, that will connect, rather than just responding with, "Well, that's absurd, that's stupid, where'd you get that from?" If we approach them, especially even inside of a church in America, like I said, it's not hard to find people who come in, and the response usually, "Well, that's not like Jesus, that's not biblical," and that is true. But if we're approaching somebody who is lost, I think there's a right way and a wrong way. So when we build bridges, this is where we begin. If there's really no meaning in life, why work so hard to convince people that there's no meaning? Because this is what I usually encounter with nihilists. They try really hard. They are passionate about convincing people that there's no meaning, and they find great purpose in convincing people that there's no purpose. And again, doesn't it seem odd that people have to spend so much time convincing themselves that there's no meaning rather than that there is meaning? And this is the question I will often pose to the nihilist. And again, utilizing the questions, just throwing this out there, isn't it odd that most people begin with a sense of meaning and purpose, or even if they don't know what it is, they seek it. I mean, so many movies are, what is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? But yet it's the nihilist that has to suddenly come to this conclusion and try to convince other people. And so this is what we mean by having them surface the truth for themselves, asking the kinds of questions, engaging in the kinds of conversations that allow them to sit back and look at that and think for themselves, rather than us coming and just immediately telling them, the short answer, well, nihilism is wrong. But to ask the kinds of questions to allow them to come to that conclusion that something might be wrong with nihilism has a much greater impact in the human mind and in the human heart. So the second sour note that we might hear is don't judge, and this can come from inside the church or outside the church. Basic belief, right and wrong are the opinions of people. You get, who am I to judge? Who are you to judge? We can't judge each other. Everybody has their own ways of doing things. But the heart longing is that some things just feel wrong. That there are some things we encounter that it, for most people, they respond, they react to it. And this has been, I don't know how many of you have been following the interesting developments in America, that we've had some riots, we've had a lot of civil unrest over racism in our country. And all of a sudden, see, before all this happened, many people in the church, well, who are you to judge? You can't really tell people there's right and wrong. And then all of a sudden, in the last few months, people are passionately declaring racism is absolutely wrong. And if you don't come out and say racism is wrong, then you're a terrible person. So it has been just this huge shift because the heart of people has cried out against this injustice. And so, but I kid you not, the beginning of the year, most of my conversations, you shouldn't judge people. You shouldn't get it. You shouldn't tell them they're wrong. Everybody sees it their own way. Everybody, and then it just complete shift into, you've got to do something about this. You must join us in this cause. And I agree, racism is wrong. I think what we see though is from the world and from the church, you've heard this sour note of, you can't tell people they're wrong, to you had better stand against this thing that is wrong. So one of the things that I've often done too is I try to bring this down, because racism is a supercharged issue in my country right now. So I try to bring this down. I like to tell people I like math, I like tacos. I also like American Ninja Warrior. I don't know if any of you know what American Ninja Warrior is. Maybe you've seen like the actual, like the real Ninja Warrior, I think from Japan. We have an American version. So I do like these things, and I am not distraught when people take opposing views. So in other words, if you don't like American Ninja Warrior, that doesn't hurt my feelings. But these issues, racism is wrong, babies shouldn't be tortured, and theft should be prosecuted. Are these preferences? Do I have grounds to judge? See, the human heart aches at injustice. And I think this is why when all of a sudden we're hearing these sour notes, even and from the world, for those who are lost, morality is relative. There's no real morality. Usually we can find those issues where their heart cries out and says, no, may this never be. And when people come to that conclusion, when they surface that for themselves, that's when you can have those productive conversations that follow up. So the third kind of sour note with belief versus heart longing. The belief, I must earn my salvation. I'm a good person. The heart longing is, we know deep down inside it isn't enough, and we long to be free. So again, and this can come outside the church, and this can also come inside the church. I encountered many believers just yesterday. There was one on social media who was just adamant that if you're not working hard enough, then I guess your salvation kind of like falls off. That was kind of what he was saying. And so there's this mindset, I've got to do it. So when you work for salvation, the question is that I simply ask, when is enough enough? When do you do enough? And this is always the question I lead with. When have you arrived? What is enough? I had a math teacher actually at a school I taught at. She was telling me this. She said, we have to, unrighteousness can't enter heaven. We have to be righteous. And I said, I understand that. I agree. But she was coming from the works that she has to do. And I said, well, when have you become righteous? When do you reach that? And she would just respond. She says, unrighteousness can't enter heaven. And I completely agreed with her. It's like, you're right. Heaven is there's no place for sin there. But when do you do enough that you've eliminated all your unrighteousness? You see, we feel the need to justify ourselves before God. And in her own heart, she recognized it's not enough. Unrighteousness can't make it. Unrighteousness can't make it. And she's right. It's never enough. And that's why when we offer salvation, we're offering that what we need has been done. It was finished on the cross. And I think for even believers in the church, we need to remind them that. For those who are lost, there's that mindset of, I've got to be good, I've got to live the best life I can, and maybe God will let me in. And I think just pushing on that just a little bit with that question, well, when have you arrived? When do you know you've reached it? When do you know that you are good enough? And that's where, if people sit and they think about it, they recognize not. And that's the beauty of the gospel. So like, it's not up to us. So that's the belief versus heart longings. Now I want to talk about some belief versus behavior issues, where they say one thing and do another. Again, people tend to disconnect what they say they believe are true is good and the way they act. This just happens. This is normal. Actions speak louder than words. We say this, but words are no less silent. So we need to listen. And I know hypocrisy happens. I'm aware of my own hypocrisy at times, and sometimes I'm not, which is why I need my wife sometimes to help me surface that truth for myself, that this is not the way that I should be. I'm not living consistently. So a specific example are people who would talk about and say integrity is important, and we want to be good people of integrity. The belief we should live lives that are honorable, noble, good. But the behavior we see from people sometimes is speeding, like fibbing, cheating, yelling, swearing. We hear people, it's fascinating to me on social media where I hear people say, we need to be kinder people, and then to, as we would say in English, cuss out somebody on social media. And I'm like, you say you want to be kind, but then you're unkind. And we need to have ways to engage people rather than just, we could cry out hypocrites. We could say, you whitewashed catacombs. We could quote some scripture. We could. But I think for our initial conversations, approaching from a different direction, recognizing that sometimes there's a couple different things going on. Sometimes we try to justify our actions, which is illegitimate, or we try to deflect them. And I teach in logic, and maybe you've heard what's called the tu quoque fallacy, the you also. Kind of like if someone doesn't do something, they're like, well, you also don't do this other thing. So we deflect our behavior. And they'll say, but you don't do X, which is irrelevant to what they're doing. Or we just ignore it, or we deny it. And that's the delusional method. So in order to reach people who have this belief versus behavior, we use what I call the Nathan method. I love the story from 2 Samuel chapter 12, is when Nathan is sent to David. The Lord sent Nathan, and it says that he came to him and he said there were two men in a certain city. So picture David. I guess he's sitting on his throne. It's a normal day in the kingdom. I don't know what that's like, but David's hanging out. Nathan comes up, and Nathan is a friend of David. So David, what can I do for you, Nathan? Nathan says, I got a story. It's two men in a certain city, one rich and the other poor. Rich men had very many flocks and herds, but the poor men had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. And he brought it up, and he grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat the morsels and drink from his cup and lie in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there was a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock of the herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. So that's Nathan's little story. David, verse 5, his anger was greatly kindled against the man. And he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. That was a little extreme. And he shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing and because he had no pity. So David has his heart connected with this issue. But that's when Nathan just looks at him and he says, you are that man, David. Because David previously had taken Bathsheba, killed Uriah, had done all these things. David, who so passionately declares the righteousness of the Lord. But almost lives openly in sin and rebellion. And so Nathan, the good friend of David, this is conversational evangelism in the Old Testament. David surfaced that truth for himself. He recognized, through that story and his reaction, David put two and two together, and it broke his heart. And that made all the change in the world for David. So a second aspect of belief versus behavior is the issue of forgiveness. And this many times comes in the context of church, preaching that people should forgive people, but practicing grudges against people. So again, we see this in the church. The world claims that forgiveness is divine, but they also reject God. And so forgiveness is more like medicine in that it is a practice. It must continuously be applied. And we have to ask ourselves, what is our motivation for forgiveness? As an example of this, when I was driving here in Fayetteville in my hometown, it was a rainy day, and I was in an older car that I had. It was kind of a beat up car, and the tires weren't that good on it. And a car pulled right in front of me, and I hit the brakes, slid right into it, and not a lot of damage. No one was injured. But the girl who was driving it was a 16-year-old girl, and in the States, 16 is when you get your license. So she is a brand new driver, made an error judgment, and I hit the back end of her. And so it was clearly her fault. It was her parents' car. And when I was in this situation, I remember when I was 16. And I remember when I made a poor judgment call. And I remember when I hit another car and it was my fault. And so we're standing there in the rain, and she's crying, she's freaking out, she's on the phone with her mom. And I said, listen, my car is already in bad shape. You're going to have to pay for this car anyway. I said, we don't have to do a report. We don't have to do any paperwork. I said, no one's hurt, no one's injured. It's just cars. You can go on if you want to. And she was on the phone with her mom. She made me talk to her mom. She's like, are you sure? Are you sure you're willing to do this? And I said, ma'am, my car is already in bad shape. I was like, and not only that, I said, what do I stand to gain from this? And I said, it's a lesson learned. And because I had been forgiven much in my life and experienced it, I was motivated to also forgive. So these are the kinds of things where we want to build bridges with other people who struggle with it. We need forgiveness from sins, not just from each other. So we have an ultimate need of forgiveness. So sharing these kinds of personal stories and things like, have you ever considered how people act when they are forgiven much? Like the story from Luke 7 about the Pharisee, and there was a woman who had come and brought the alabaster jar. And so we can share these kinds of stories because when people are holding these grudges, there's an emotional hurt there. They believe we're supposed to be forgiving, but they can't forgive. They're having trouble connecting these things. So when we're doing evangelism with the lost, this is where when we communicate the kind of forgiveness that Jesus offers, the kind of reconciliation. Again, there's this heart longing in people when they recognize, yeah, we're supposed to be forgiving, and God is the most forgiving of people. And you realize in the church, when we don't forgive, again, this is why it plays right into discipleship as well. Using these kinds of stories, people surface it. This is why I should be forgiving. I should be forgiving people. And it also helps us connect back with our Savior, who is the source of our ultimate forgiveness. So then we go to belief versus belief. And I told you we'd be drinking from a fire hose again, but we'd be going quickly with this. So belief versus belief are contradictions. These are contrary beliefs. The affirmation of the one is the rejection of the other. Now, in a Western context, believe it or not, I have to deal with karma all the time. That over here in the States, Christians talk about karma constantly, and you hear it in our culture. Now, there's the belief in terms of Christianity that God is sovereign. Even outside of Christianity, there's the belief in justice. Okay. So the contrary belief is we're subject to cosmic cause and effect. Now, in the West, we end up corrupting the concept of karma. So what I'm going to talk about, you're going to reckon that's not karma. I know that, but I'm saying this is how it typically manifests here in the West. So we need to clarify the issue. Karma is not you reaping what you sow. In the States, I hear it all the time. People, somebody drives badly on the interstate and then they get a flat tire and they'll say, that's karma for you. And I'm like, that's not what karma is. That's not how that works. But there's this mindset of just this cosmic forces that when you do something bad, that almost like the universe is going to strike you. That you are mean to somebody and then lightning strikes you, or you say something bad and then you fall, you trip, and you hurt yourself. So there's this mindset at work. So karma is you receive good and bad as a cause of effect from one life to the next. So in dealing with this, we can approach it from both directions, and that's why instant karma, I try to tell people that's not what that is. That's not what you're thinking about. So in building the bridges, this is where I ask people, I'm curious to know, do you think that people who do bad things will face karma or judgment? And this is where we begin to get to the heart of the issue. That even for non-believers, many times the karma is sometimes all they have. It's like, well, these people who've lived a horrible life, they're going to get it at some point. Is it really that we want people to get it, or do we want judgment? Do we want punishment administered for the wrong that has been done? Because again, it's one thing for somebody to injure me and then as they're running away to fall and trip and hurt themselves. That's not judgment. That's not them getting what they deserve. That's just something bad happened to me and then something bad happened to them. So this is where we surface these ideas. And when it comes to the larger idea of karma, I said, is it justice to punish someone who knows they are being punished, or to punish them and they have no idea why they are being punished? And this goes back to the idea that if you're reincarnated and you're facing karma from your past life and you have no idea what you've done wrong, then it becomes this issue that's not justice, that's not punishment. And I think there's something in our heart that finds that unfulfilling. I find the same thing happens in movies, that in the movies, when something bad happens to the bad guy, there's a couple of movies I've seen like this where the bad guy did something that was wrong and they seem to get away with it, but then as they're driving away, they have a car wreck and they are severely injured or they die. That's not justice. That's almost empty in the way I look at this, and I'm like, well, they just happened. It just so happened that they suffered, but that's in no way justice. So I think that's where we have these conflicting beliefs, and we need to be able to surface what's that contradiction there. Why don't these pieces fit together? Another sour note on the issue of origins, belief that God created everything as a special act, and the belief that random mutations develop in the world. Even with non-believers, when we deal with this, that even in our world, in my society, that so many people preach evolution. All of the people who are lost, well, hey, Darwin, evolution, we all are basically higher order animals. But again, at the same time, racism is wrong. And I don't know if any of you have ever read Darwin's works, but if you've read Darwin's works, you would know that what we reference as racism in our modern day follows from a truly evolutionary view of the world. So that's actually, I would say that's one of these belief versus belief contradictions. That somebody who holds to evolution yet says racism is wrong, it's a contradiction of belief. So for believers, we say God created everything special and he uses random mutations to create the world. It's a contradiction in terms. So we need to help people see these things. And the first, when as far as believers go, Genesis account is narrative. It's not poetry. When you read Genesis 1, he's not giving us a poetic rendition. He's just giving us a very basic account. And I do admit it's basic, but it's not like the Psalms. Plus, when it comes to Christianity, dealing with this with believers, Romans 5 tells us the fall is based on one Adam. 1 Corinthians tells us the mission of Christ is based on the failure of that Adam. Our resurrection is based on that creation of the Adam, that we're going to be recreated as we should be. In Acts 17, we all come from one person. So the genealogy, also other issues, the genealogy of Jesus. Jesus also referred to the literal Adam and Eve. So with all of this data and why we learn apologetics, here's how we build those bridges. We ask questions to move forward. So I ask believers, if Genesis 1 through 3 are myth, then isn't Jesus wrong? Because Jesus took it literally. And it's just a question, and they might say, where is that? Pull out the verses, show them, let them examine these. Or I even heard this just 2 days ago at church. Someone in my church, for whatever, I don't know how we got on evolution, but he said, evolution is a mathematical impossibility. I did these slides well before this weekend. I want you to know that. But I had one of the believers in my church just come up again. I don't remember why, but and again, with my math background, we talk about evolution, the whole concept of it. Did you know that it's like mathematically impossible? It's not even an option. If God can create the universe from nothing, why would he need the random mutations to create humanity? In other words, just a question of why would he do this? How do these ideas fit together? Have you considered that scientists might be limited in their worldview? Now, this is a broad question, but this is something we don't ever stop and really ask. Have you ever considered that maybe, like I've done this before as a mathematician, when I tell people, if you're going to do math, and I don't know how many of you like math, but most people can add 2 plus 2. All right, well, if I tell you, out of the potentially infinite amount of numbers that are out there, you're allowed to use any numbers for your calculations, but you cannot use the number 4. You can use potentially infinitely many numbers. You're just not allowed to use the number 4. And then I ask you, what is 2 plus 2? You're kind of stuck. You might think, well, some of you might try to get creative and you might say 4.00000000001. You might try to wiggle around it, but that's still not actually correct. So one number was not allowed to be used, and that's going to throw off all the equations. So this is why I ask, are scientists limited in their worldview because they have seemed to have sliced off parts of reality as not even considerable? And if you've done that, again, if we only examine the material world, if there is a spiritual component and you're not even allowed to look at it, you'll never find it. Just like if you ask what's 2 plus 2 and you've sliced off the number 4, you'll never find the right answer. So this is where we again, trying to help people connect these dots for themselves. And so continuing on very, very quickly, the last one, the illogical belief, the idea that ideas themselves contradict each other. Much like when we have somebody who says skepticism, that you should be skeptical about everything. Okay, so if true, you should be skeptical about your skepticism, which means you should doubt the doubting of everything, including the doubting of the very statement you are doubting. Now, I often tell my students at my Bible college, this is why I record my lectures. You can play that back slowly so you can hear it. Because again, if you're supposed to doubt everything, then you should doubt the very statement that you should doubt everything. It's illogical. It's self-defeating. And so to build bridges, rather than just looking at somebody and say, well, you're self-defeating, you don't make a bit of sense, we might be able to help. And what I do is when I meet skeptics, first of all, I acknowledge a healthy bit of skepticism is important. The Bereans of Acts 17, Paul preached and they said, wait now, we need to look at this for ourselves. Healthy skepticism is good. So rather than when you meet a skeptic, we'll say, oh, well, you just don't believe anything. Building bridges is to say, you ask questions. This is good. But then what we need to do is we need to move and say, there's an unhealthy skepticism that rejects all answers and rejects any concept of faith. And so one of the things I've done is I've asked, have you ever thought about the relationship between faith and reason? And so there's really three options. There's faith over reason, just believe, and most skeptics aren't willing to do that. There's reason over faith, deduce everything, and I don't believe that's possible. But then there's faith with reason. Find out what's true and then commit your soul to it. And I think that when you have a skeptic who is doubting everything, there's again that first of all, they've made a statement that's illogical, but connects back in with that heart longing. You wish there was some truth to anchor your soul to. And that's what we're trying to offer. Something similar to this is the idea that there is no absolute truth. Somebody says, if they make this claim, there's no absolute truth. Well, that is an absolute statement, true for everyone, that there are no statements that are true for everyone. Again, I can say that again, but if you look at it, and most of you if you've hung around Ratio Christi long enough, you've heard things like this, that you hopefully have some skill growing in this area. So in setting the record straight, I remind people truth is what corresponds to reality. A fact is a demonstrated statement of truth. It's what is. So there's opinions correspond to the person. It doesn't make truth relative, but it relates truth to the person. So this is where I began asking these questions concerning the nature of truth. And because people say, well, everything is just opinion. And I ask them, is it your opinion that everything is opinion, or is it true that everything is opinion? You stop and think about that for a second. And if they say, well, if it's just their opinion that everything is opinion, then I don't have to listen. But if it's true that everything is opinion, it contradicts itself. So there are some truths then to connect to. Well, what is true? Reality would be true, because it doesn't make sense to say that reality isn't true, or that there's some things that are false and that's what reality is. These are all contradictions, and sometimes it makes believers cross their eyes when I talk this way. But at least in my context, I have these conversations regularly, and I have these conversations inside the church, and I have them outside the church. And that's why we need to come with this a different manner, rather than aggressively dealing with it, but trying to help them see, how do we form our opinions? There's preferences, there's extrapolations, but a fact cannot be my opinion. I either accept the fact or reject it. And again, if my only reason for rejecting a fact is my opinion, then I'm being irrational. Like the irrationality is not a virtue. One more, last one, and I wanted to get to this because this is inside the church and outside as well. God is beyond us, and we can't know anything about him. I'm encountering more and more believers who are saying this, and of course we encounter this in various religions. But if that were true, you wouldn't know that you couldn't know him. That if we can't know anything about God at all, then you can't know that he even exists. Because to know that God exists is to know something about him. So there's three ways to think about a thing, and I will often ask people this. I was like, when you talk about what you know about God, do you mean, in this case, univocal language, meaning the same way? So in other words, like when I talk about God is love, and Scripture says God is love, I don't mean it in the univocal the same way I mean it of people. When I say that God is good, I don't mean it the same way, because God is an infinite good. Humans are limited good. We have a limited love. God is infinite love. We talk about wrath. God is infinite, eternal wrath. That is different from ours. I think what happens, people get confused and they say, well, our words don't connect at all with God. That's equivocal. In other words, when we say love, we know what human love is, but we have no idea what that means in terms of God. Well, if that's the case, again, we're into complete skepticism. We can't say anything meaningful about God. The way we talk about God is through analogical language, kind of like the way that we have a similar notion, something similar going on, that when I look at what it means for humans to love, then I understand God's love is like that, but far greater. I think this is what draws us to worship him. That when we talk about God, God is love, we have love. God is always different, but similar. So all of these ideas, all of these concepts, as we said, go back to the conversational evangelism. This is just a small sampling. This is, and again, when I say small, I've done this at a conference before. I took out a lot of different topics we could have chatted on and we could have shared about. The number of issues, the number of objections, the number of things I hear from believers and non-believers. That's why if you were to hold up that Baker's Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics, that thing is thick. It is a lot of pages. Dr. Geisler, I think, was writing the equivalent of a 40-page research paper every day for I don't know how many weeks in writing that book. So there are all kinds of objections. There's all kinds of issues. What I'm hoping you're seeing, what I'm hoping from this is not so much that okay, now when I hear this, exactly what do I say? There is an attitude and a spirit with which we approach people. And if we can identify what the contradiction is, what the issue is, if their heart longs for something else, if their beliefs don't connect together, if their behavior demonstrates a hypocrisy, or if their statements themselves are confused, then we can approach them in a way that's going to be far more effective than simply offering condemnation. I think that we can offer soft rebuking in the sense that, have you considered that this idea is wrong? Instead of saying your idea is wrong, have you considered this idea is wrong? Have you considered this contradiction? And then you begin a conversation. And the best, I'll end with this, the best and most fruitful discussions I have with my children is when I sit down with them and I don't tell them, I ask them, what did you do wrong? And they tell me, was this a good idea? No. Why did you do this? And they tell me why they did it, and it was because of some sinful motivation. Well, how are you going to fix this? And they tell me. And so even as a father, I use these conversational evangelism methods that even my children, and sometimes I have to kind of bring it out of them. Sometimes I ask the question, what did you do? And they don't want to tell me, because that's the human heart. That's many times we know, we just don't want to put it to words. And I won't tell them. I want them to say it themselves, especially when they know. And if I'm asking them the questions and I learn that they genuinely do not know and do not understand, well, then I'm in a place to shine the light and to bring that truth in the conversation. But if they've already got that and they surface that for themselves, those are the most effective conversations I have with my children. And those are the most effective conversations I have with anyone inside the church or outside. So that is my presentation for this evening. I'd like to now open up to questions. And I do see that Laura made a comment that in my question, well, how do you do 2 + 2 if you don't have the answer 4? And she offers another mathematical equation of 5 - 1, which doesn't actually answer the question. It just reshapes the question. It just creates a new question instead of answering the question. So good try, good try. Because you can still ask the question, well, what is 5 minus 1? We still don't have a definite quantity. We're still stuck with an equation, with a problem that still needs a solution. They are equivalent and they are equal to something that, in the case of our illustration, I'm not letting you use, which is why we can't list that quantity. But good job, Laura. Questions that you have from the presentation? I either did that good of a job or that bad of a job. I'm not sure. So any questions that you have that might be related or even tangentially is something that came up that you'd like to ask about.
Yeah, are there anybody who wants to ask Thomas any question?
Oh, got some questions.
Yeah.
All religions are good. What is this under? So if somebody makes the claim that all religions are good, then that's going to require some clarification. You know, what do you mean by that? So when somebody says all religions are good, I need to know what they mean by good and what they're referencing. So let's say that every religion, if they're going to say, well, every religion teaches people how to be good, we'll go with the moral idea. All religions teach morality. Well, there you have a belief versus behavior issue, because some of the things that religions teach actually are bad behaviors. So many religions do teach good behaviors, but they also mix in with bad behaviors. So that's where you find that kind of contradiction. It's like, well, Christianity does that too, and that's where I would challenge that. Christianity teaches bad behavior, uh, and I think that when you look at all religions teaching good behavior, I think also there's this heart longing issue, because yeah, some religions do teach good behavior, like honor your parents. But if the religion also teaches you to murder other people, honor your parents and murder your neighbor, that can be a problem. Or even the way that if some people try to, in Christianity in the States, we have a huge issue with abortion. And if we're going to teach that you should, preserve life, protect the innocent, but kill babies. And I'm talking like post-birth abortion, like the baby is born alive and you're able to kill it. There are Christians who advocate this, and I know this because I've taught them. I've engaged them directly, and I can tell people that's not what Christianity teaches. So I think also there's an issue of what do those religions actually teach. It's a very, very broad statement, but you can usually figure out if you start clarifying that and bringing that down to specifics, you'll be able to figure out what's going wrong in there. Oh, more questions. Good. Oh, so we're gonna use a chat bar today. Can God create a stone so heavy that he cannot lift it? Is that similar to the 2 + 2 question? Not exactly. Can God create a stone so heavy that he cannot lift it is the illogical belief, because the question itself is a contradiction. The question is trying to find something that God cannot do. So when they say, if God can create a stone that he can't lift it, then he can't lift it. And if God can't create a stone so big that he can't lift it, then he can't create it. So they try to find something that God cannot do. So the question is a bit illogical in that sense. But what I like to do, and so here's another thing you can do in conversational evangelism. So an additional tool for your tool belt. When somebody asks a question like this, can God create a stone so heavy that he can't carry it or lift it? They're trying to find something God can't do. That's their goal. So what I do is I just give them a better question. I was like, well, that question, we can sit and play with it. Let me tell you something that God can't do. If you want to find something he can't, because you're asking the question, I'll tell you what he can't do. God can't lie, according to scripture. So now what we've done is we're starting to, and people, well, if God can't lie, then he can't do everything. Well, see, now we're starting to clarify the definition of what does it mean for God to be omnipotent, all powerful. See, God being able to be omnipotent doesn't mean he can do what is logically contradictory, like the original question, or even making squared circles. We often use that one. Dr. Geisler often talked about that. God can't make square circles because they're a contradiction in terms. That's not a limitation of power. That's because God is a realistic God, and God cannot lie because lying is a corruption. God can't do anything that is corrupt because of his perfection. It's kind of like in the States, we play basketball and you shoot the ball at the hoop and you miss. No one goes, congratulations, you missed. The true ability is always being able to make the basket, always being able to hit the mark. So that's God's omnipotence. So I think that's a confusion around some concepts. So we were talking about these sour notes in terms of beliefs and contradictions. One of the things that you should listen for too is misunderstandings of terms. That is another issue as well. Elaborate on engaging people using the heart longing. This is when I listen to people talk and they say one thing but they long for another, almost like, again, I've got to work, I've got to live out my faith, I've got to do these things, but yet their heart, they long for that freedom. This is where we just need to show, okay, you have a contradiction. You say you believe this, but your heart is longing for something else. And in terms of non-believers, usually what they're longing for is what Christianity is providing, because that's reality. If we create a false idea or a false concept that does not connect with who and what we are as creatures, then our heart's going to long for what we really are. And so this is very personal. It can manifest in many ways. That's why we're trying to offer principles that guide, because I guarantee in your situations it's going to end up different. You're going to hear somebody else who says, oh, I have to offer these sacrifices all the time, and they long for the freedom for that, they don't have to keep doing that. Well, Jesus offers the sacrifice once for all. We don't have to. Or if somebody thinks that, again, if they have to literally beat their body into submission, it's like, you don't have to do that. The spirit, they're longing for freedom for that. The spirit provides that. So this is where we show Christianity has the solution they're seeking many times. But again, this is very personal to the people, and it's just we need to be mindful and think about ways. And the way I say it is, we want to put this on our radar. We want people to be able to see, and we want to be able to help people see this and be mindful that this is what we're looking for. What's my take on the recent change of the definition of sex in the U.S.? It's bad. Let me put it in one word. It's bad. How would you start a conversation with someone who holds a fluid view of sexual identity? I've had this conversation many times. I spent many years in youth ministry, so I can tell you I've had a number of students who have come out of the closet as gay and lesbian. Some of them I considered almost like sons and daughters. Like, we had a very close relationship. And so usually here we have a conflict of desires. There's a heart longing, but they're misidentifying it. This happened with a student of mine in particular. She came out as a lesbian, so this wasn't a transgender issue. She said she was going to be a lesbian. So again, the church condemned her. So this is why I teach what I do. The church just attacked, like, how dare you? This is stupid. You know better. You've been taught. I took her through, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I took her through hermeneutics. It's not that she didn't know. So I sat her down one day and I asked her, I said, are you attracted to women? And her answer was no. but a woman can't hurt her the way a man can. Now I have the true heart longing. Now I have the real issue. It's not a sexuality thing. It's a safety relationship thing. Well, see, Jesus provides that. In Christianity, what she so desperately wants, which is a good thing, safety and relationship, that is a good heart longing, and she's misidentified the source. And that will never bring what she truly wants. And that's what I try to do, is show her that. So these are a lot of conversations we're having in the church right now, is and also communicating first that it's wrong and that it won't fulfill, and that even when in terms of transgenderism, if we have a guy who thinks that he's a woman, I want to get to the heart of that. I want to know why that's going on. There's many times under the surface something that's motivating that, something that's pushing that, and if we don't spend the time figuring that out, we're more of addressing the symptoms rather than the disease, the cause of what's happening. Couple of specific questions. Why do you call me good? Jesus answered, no one is good except God. Mark 10:18. Excellent point. Jesus is clarifying with this rich young ruler. He says, you called me good. Do you know what you're saying? Because Jesus himself claimed to be one with the Father. He claimed to be the Messiah God. So it's almost this sense when you look at it, Jesus is not denying that he's good. But if Jesus is God, he is good. And that's the connection that's being made in that passage. Lots of questions. Good. See, all you guys have taken to the, how are we on time? Like I've how are we with this? Is it still good? Answer a few more.
We still have plenty of time.
Okay. So some say religion is between me and God, so one should not be converting one another. Religion is personal. This is where, again, what have they got right? A person's relationship with God, I think, is the most important relationship. And if a relationship is wrong, such as a person who has a false God, then the most unloving thing you could do is leave a person in that false relationship. I've compared it to, that in our relationships between like husband and wife, if somebody falls in love with a mannequin, like a statue, which, again, this might seem silly, but if someone is in love with a statue and says, this is my husband, this is my wife, that statue can never fulfill that role. And if a person is misidentified a statue as capable of a genuine relationship, well, then for me to say, well, I wish you the best, again, I tell people that's rather unloving. Why wouldn't I, if somebody has made such a desperate mistake, why wouldn't I try to offer truth? Now, I don't come in, this is where I said, we don't come in and say, well, that's stupid. Can't you see? It's obvious. But allowing people to surface the truth for themselves. Can that statue hear you? Can that statue respond? Offer forgiveness? Can they love you? So this is why if somebody's following a false god, false religion, they're going to be seeking things they can't find. And that's actually one of the things that's mentioned in scriptures. I think even God says, do these idols hear you? Do these little wooden statues, do they listen? We need to help people surface those truths, because it's the same reason why, even not in religion, if somebody is driving a really bad car, well, I want the best for my friends. I want the best for my family. So if my friends and family are doing things or have things that are not the best or dangerous, especially when they're dangerous, then I'm going to make very pointed efforts to try to convince them that what they're doing is wrong, not from a stance of opinion, but because I can see the danger and the problems that lurk. And that's just with things. God is the ultimate, and the consequences of following the wrong God have eternal ramifications. And out of love, we go, and not for the purposes of so much converting as it is offering the truth, not so they can be just like us, but it's like, if we have found the truth, my heart for friends and family and my neighbors whom I don't know is they need that truth that they're missing out on. So people, like, I'm assuming for in Asia, jungle people who live in the jungle who have never ever heard of Christ, okay, or the gospel, will they go to hell or heaven? The answer is, I think we try to throw a blanket over it. The reality is Romans 1 tells us that we've all seen the revelation of God, that God's visible attributes have been clearly seen from what has been made. I know of many missionaries who end up going into jungles and who will tell if they go into a community that has never heard of the gospel, but yet they were waiting on somebody to tell them about Jesus. And so God had reached those people. The bottom line is, if we reject God's general revelation, he's not obligated to give us any more revelation. I know that was always Norm's really quick reply. So of course the answer is, well, what if they've never ever heard the gospel? General revelation seems to be sufficient to condemn, and if they've rejected that, then they've rejected truth. If they receive that, it seems to be the case, whether it's in the jungles, Middle East, Europe, wherever it is, that when people seek God, he is not blind to their seeking. It's the best general answer I give. We all stand condemned because of our sin. So I think I could probably spend the next half hour on that. So not that I'm trying to breeze over, but if you want some resources and you want a more extended answer, email me. I'll definitely get that to you. How do you continue the conversation with some people who say you have your right to believe what you want and I have my right to believe what I want? Well, I agree with them. You know, I tell my students, I teach at a Bible college. I tell my students all the time when they're doing their papers, I said, listen, you don't have to agree with me. You can be wrong if you want to. I always tell them that. You can be wrong if you want to. You're not graded on whether or not you agree with me. You're graded on whether or not you're consistent and you learn the material. That's my biggest concern. I teach an ethics class, so there's always disagreement in my ethics class. So when people say, well, I have the right to believe what I want to, well, yeah, you do. But just because you have the right to believe it doesn't make your belief true. Now, if you want to ask a question of truth, well, truth is very narrow. Reality is what it is. And so if we have contradictions, God exists, God does not exist, and somebody believes God exists and somebody believes God does not exist, both have their rights to believe that, but they both can't be true. You don't have the right to believe what you want and be true at the same time. You have to match what you believe to the truth. Kind of like if you believe that taking Tylenol will cure cancer, you have the right to believe that, but it's not going to make it true. And it has been demonstrated Tylenol does not cure cancer. So if I have somebody who believes that Tylenol cures cancer and they have cancer, then you had better believe that I'm going to do whatever I can to demonstrate that their belief is faulty. But it's medicine. Very good. You do need medicine, but you need the right kind of medicine. Okay. Cancer or Tylenol takes care of my headaches. Yes, but you have something worse than a headache. And this is where we continue in those conversations, clarifying, when it comes to God, this brings me peace. Yes, God brings peace, but there is false peace from other things and other things that bring a temporary peace, but ultimate destruction. Continuing to bring these things in the conversation, moving forward. Why does the Catholic Bible have more books than the Protestants? Because they include the Apocrypha, and there's lots of reasons they shouldn't. If you want to know, I have an article. I can give you that. How would you reply to people who've asked, where was your God when something bad happened? Thank you. That's the problem of evil. That's one of the ones I cut out on this, because problem of evil is probably the number one topic. It deserves a significant answer. So Dr. Norman Geisler wrote an entire book called If God, Why Evil? It only took me a day to read it. It's not a deep philosophical book, but it is thorough in answering these kinds of issues. And so where is God when something bad happens? He's the same place he was when all the bad befell Job. That in the book of Job, you see God on his throne. He is not ignorant, but God also views our suffering in a way very differently than the way we do. Because when we suffer, it hurts and we freak out, just like I watch my children. When my child, hurts his foot, it's the end of the world. He's down on the ground, he thinks he's about to die. And I'm like, no, you hurt your toe. Okay. You hurt your foot. You're going to be okay. I know it hurts right now, but crying, weeping, ferocious emotion. And I don't minimize it. He just doesn't understand how to relate his pain to the larger picture and how to handle it. So I think in terms of life, there are some genuinely horrible things that can happen to us. And the promise we have from God is the pain is only for a little while, and that all tears will be wiped away, that all things will be made new, that with those who place faith in Jesus, there is coming the day that we will forget all these things, and it is glory from then on out. Without Jesus, all we have is pain and separation from God. So where is God when the bad things happen, when the suffering happens? He is on his throne, and suffering many times is the vehicle that refines us as human beings. We identify with the sufferings of Christ. And I'll be honest, I am thankful for my sufferings. I'm never thankful when I'm suffering for my sufferings. I'm enduring those things. But afterwards, the things that I've gone through, which some of them are pretty terrible, I look back and Peter says the faith that is tested is better than even gold. And you can't get that faith. You can't get a tested faith any other way than having that faith tested. We have a recommendation, Nancy Pearcey's book, Love That Body. That's a good one. Almost done. Atheist background. Where did God come from? Category mistake. That's the illogical question. God is in the category of things that does not have a beginning. So, that's like, what does blue smell like? Blue is not in the category of sense. Okay, it's visual. Can you have copies of my slides? Absolutely. I'm going to put my email here again for those of you still hanging around. If you haven't got it, tmcuddy@ngim.org. If you want those slides, just email me. I will send those to you. Last thing, what is your take on some Christians believe everything is due to God? That person misplaces keys. 3 years later, he finds the keys and then says that God did a miracle. Yes, I would say typically that's an overreaction. God's providence is an interesting thing, because usually you don't see the providence until after it's all happened and you kind of piece these things together. It's highly unlikely that God miraculously allows your keys to teleport to where you can find them. Is God capable of doing that? Yes, I do not deny that. If God exists, miracles are possible. But that's not his normal mode of operation. And in his providence, because here's how God works, and I fully believe it. In his providence, maybe you couldn't find your keys. Took an extra 5 minutes to find your keys. And that 5 minutes is what made you 5 minutes behind on your journey, where that car that zipped through the intersection went through and didn't hit you because you were 5 minutes behind. You'll never know it. That's God's providence. The ways that he has preserved us and saved us. That's why when the tragedy does happen, God is fully capable of, we always say, well, he could have made it where it didn't happen. Yes, he could have, and he didn't. And God is good. and God is just, and God is faithful. So I praise him for all the horrible things I've never had to endure. And I look to him for the strength for every trial I must face, because he is faithful and he has demonstrated himself both from scripture and in my own life. So
Right.
I'm running out of time personally. So
Yeah, I think we are running out of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas McCarty. It's really a very inspiring, intellectual, and very practical message that you have given us. I personally are very encouraged by your sharing, and also I'm also encouraged by the numbers of participants. We have slightly more than 100 that participate today. It shows that many are very interested in apologetics, and in the near future, we will plan more of these apologetics talks. We plan to have 2 Tuesdays per month. And remember, as I announced just now, on the 7th of July, we will have Dr. David Geisler to speak to us, will teach us on conversational evangelism. So stay tuned. We will, in a week's time, we will send you the link. So please keep in touch. Brother Stephen, do you have anything to announce?
Nothing much except that I think we are also planning a course on conversational evangelism with Norm Geisler Institute, and hopefully we can find churches that would like to anchor it. I think it would be great if we can do that.
Right.
that is
Possibly-
Oh,
sorry,
sorry. That was one announcement I wanted to make with that, is that in the fall, we're starting a host of new courses, and our courses for the fall, we do them mentor led, meaning that once a week we sit down just like this, and for an hour and a half after you've done the reading for the chapter and you've watched the videos, then you get to ask your questions and contextualize. We have at least 4, possibly 7 that we're going to be offering starting this fall. So if you want to continue in training, you want to know how we can use these with your church, things like that, that's what we want to do. We want to think outside the box and help all of you. So feel free to connect and ask more about that, and send me your email if you want to get announcements. So when we announce all these things, you'll know what's coming down the line. So
Right. Thank you very much. Don't go away. Can we ask Dr. Danny Lowe to close for us in prayer? Remember to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for Thomas and the very encouraging things he shared with us, how his heart is not just for having a large database of knowledge, but being able to transfer that into action so that we can be a minister to the people around us. Thank you for your truth. Your word is truth. Thank you that you're the God of all truth. And thank you that you have given us the privilege of being your ambassadors of truth. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Amen. Amen. So thank you very much for joining us. We hope to see you again on the 7th of July. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night. Thank you.